In our last video, we have completed our entity class and we have also showcased the importance of DTL auto property. So in today's video, we'll cover entity manager and to save an object into our database. In our previous video, we have inserted our record from database, whereas we have inserted this value in our database. So you could see that the database have one record. Now in upcoming videos, as I have said earlier, that we are going to use our code to insert the object into the database. Now let's jump into. Before that, we'll do a little bit of cleanup. So basically we just showcase that we added this field address and how shown into our database. Now we don't need this address because we'll consider address as a complex object in later video. So we'll remove address from here and we will remove address field from here. Okay. Also we will also do a cleanup. We'll go and check our application.properties. Okay, it is updated. What we will do is that we will delete these tables and we'll recreate it. Okay, table does not exist. Let us refresh one more time. Okay, and also we have created one more customer entity. We'll remove this because in starting video we have created for demo, but now we don't need this, so we'll also delete this. Perfect. So now what we'll do first is we will keep it as it is, because we have already seen that if we run this application now, we will create a table into our database. So now let's jump here and let us understand entity manager. So entity manager do all the work when we are dealing with JPA or Hibernate. Usually Spring Data JPA provide JPA repo abstraction, whereas you could use JPA repository to perform all the CRUD operations. But if you want more control in your code, you need to understand how entity manager work, because in the backend Hibernate or JDBC is performing all the tasks. And if you are working in a company or in an MNC or in a Fortune 500 companies, there will be many applications, many code which are still using entity manager, which is quite highly efficient and is still used. JPA repository also can be used. We will cover both, but first we need to understand entity manager and then later on we will cover JPA repo. So now what are we going to do is we'll just simply create one DAO. DAO is one of the favorite design pattern, data access object, and then what we will do is we'll create DAO implementation. We will have DAO layer and then we will have DAO implementation. Before creating anything, we should always have our, or we will create it, because otherwise, okay, we'll create our DAO first. So we will have customer detail DAO. This will be our DAO interface, and this will not be a class, this will be an interface, so you need to make sure. Now our DAO interface is created. What we are going to do is we just simply create a method called save, which will take our customer detail object. That's it. Now we'll close this and then we'll come to our DAO package. We'll create a package called IMPL implementation. It should look better when you have more structured code. So in this we will create our implementation class, which is customer detail DAO IMPL. This class will implement our customer detail DAO. As this have a method, what are we going to do is we need to implement that method. We need to override that method. So we'll have override, and then we'll have public void save customer detail, and then we will have, now what we are going to do is we need to have our entity manager. So what are we going to do is we will define entity manager. Then what are we going to do is we need to inject our dependency. So as we know, this is the use case of what? Dependency injection. Earlier we understand, right, that in Spring, how many types of injection are there? Comment now, right now, if you remember how many types of injection are there. Pause the video and comment how many types of injection are there. If you haven't watched my video, you could go and watch that. So now here, this is the use case. Inject entity manager using how are we going to inject our using constructor injection, not field injection. Huh? Many people, you go and check your company code, definitely people are using field injection. I bet you only few people use this, and that's the difference between software engineer and a good software engineer. So we are going to use constructor injection. Now let us quickly inject private entity manager. Now what are we going to do is public constructor. So we will just entity manager, and then this dot entity manager equals to entity manager. So now what are we going to do is we are going to call our entity manager dot persist to save our object. So what is our object? Our object is customer detail. So that's our constructor injection, and then we are persisting our object using entity manager. So if you understand now, this is the use case of injection, dependency injection. You are injecting. You have not written a single line of code how this thing works. You understand, right? This is written by someone else. Some people. Yeah, you see here. I think we can also see the name. I think let us download the source. See who has written this code. Oh, Linda D. Mitchell has written this entity manager class or entity manager interface. Yeah, it's the interface. So we are injecting her code into our code. That's the beauty of Spring and dependency injection. We are injecting someone else's dependency into our project. So that's why dependency injection, that concept is very important for you to understand how those three things differ: constructor injection, setter injection, and field injection. And there is also called method injection. Method and field sort of same, but anyhow we'll come up to method later on. But for now, constructor injection is very important. So now quickly jump, if you haven't watched the video, you could go and watch it out. You will understand. This is entity manager. We are doing constructor injection. Okay, now coming back to how are we going to insert this thing. So now we have our customer detail. Okay, before moving forward, okay, we'll come to this later. We will just come to our application. We'll create one method here. So what our method will do, we will just simply create a method. So method will be private. Method will return nothing. So our method will be add customer details, and this method will accept what? this method will accept our customer detail DAO. Then what are we going to do is we will call our object customer detail, create our object, and then what are we going to do is we are going to pass all the values. So we will pass our ID, and then username will be elon.mus. First name will be Elon, then Mus, then email, okay, and then the last is mobile number. Perfect. Okay. So we have created our object and we are inserting our value. Now what we will do is we will just do customer detail DAO dot save, and then we will pass our customer detail, and then we will just dot get the information customer detail dot what has been inserted. Again, we can also log this. Okay, we will just do one more thing. Customer detail. Okay, and then we can do one more thing is we will just simply take our ID. When we are going to build the UI, then it will look more better. UI is very simple, but backend is very important. ID is okay, perfect. But before that, we also need to inject this object into our command line runner, which is customer detail DAO, and then are we going to call this thing from our code. So we will call our method add customer and then pass our customer details DAO. Perfect. Hope you are understanding what we are doing is we just why we need this command line runner. Whatever we are doing here, right, we can convert this into a REST API. These things make a lot more sense when are we going to understand two things. One is REST API to database, and then another is Spring Batch. When we are going to understand how Spring Batch works, then this will help you understand. So we are climbing the ladder step by step, and this is just a method. This method is just taking our customer detail of DAO, okay, and then we are creating an object. This information will come from UI or come from your Spring Batch or some Excel, and then using this save method is where this save method we define our interface. And now we are just this is just a log, and then we are getting the ID. How we are getting this ID? We are getting this ID from our getter and setter method, which we have defined in our entity. So we are just getting it. So why we are not setting it? Because we are just getting this information from database, which is saved in database. So this object persists in database. So how it persists in database? If you come here, customer DAO, in this customer DAO, what are we going to do? This is implementing using customer detail implementation class. Here we are implementing EntityManager, and if you see, this save has one usage which is used here. It has one implementation. Oh, perfect. So now we will come back to our database. We will just refresh it and we will see, okay, nothing is present in here. Okay, now there is one more thing we need to understand is that I have only added our customer detail ID here, which is suppose a ID which comes from the UI or maybe some other mode or Excel. There is one unique ID or primary key, you could say, which will be generated by the table, which is this ID. So now there is another annotation which is called generated value. So what this annotation does is, this annotation provides us a feature where we can have an auto increment feature which will help us to increment the IDs. So there are four strategies: auto, identity, sequence, UUID, and table. So we will just use any of these. Any of these is fine based on the use case which your company prefer, or your company have a definitely set of strategy. We will in our upcoming videos we will try to explore all of these. So let us explore table this time, and we will see what happens once we set up this. So now we will come to our application and then we will run it and we'll see what happens. So far so good. Our pool is starting. We will also cover this Hikari pool later on. So it is saying that our beam, we are facing some issue. So what is the issue we are facing? Could not found. Customer detail here that could not be found. Why? Why my customer detail DAO could not be found? Customer detail DAO. Where is customer detail DAO? Why I cannot find? Why it cannot be found? We had to do one more thing. We need to annotate it with repo that read. Now we will rerun it and we will see what happens. Now you see that while inserting the record into a database, we face an issue. Invalid data access API uses exception. What it is saying, no entity manager with actual transaction available for current thread cannot reliably process persist call. Why it is saying this? You know why it is saying? We'll come to this later, but let us fix how to solve this issue. Then we'll come to this later. We will add an annotation called transactional, which has to be from Spring Framework, not from Jakarta. Now once we add this into our save method, which is calling persist, we will run our application again. Wow, it worked. So in this video, when we are developing, we face two issues. Whenever we do something, we miss out something, and then we need to read the log and we need to identify that what is the issue. Okay, now coming to this, our first issue was adding transactional. Why? Because we need to add transactional annotation, because in EntityManager we need to add it when we are doing persist. So in data, whenever you are dealing with database, right, if you need to understand in a way that, okay, just understand. I'll tell you with an example. For example, we are doing any payment transaction. So what happens is, right, when you are transferring your money, so at the time when you are transferring your money, right, and if suppose someone is also viewing your account, now this transactional annotation helps in a way that if suppose something go wrong when you are sending the money, then it has to roll back, means that transaction should not even succeed. For example, you are transferring money to an account. So what happens is that in the process of transferring money, person A transfer money to person B, whereas person A has $100 and he transfers, for example, $50 to person B. Now, technically, after the successful transfer, person A will have $50 and person B will have $50. But now imagine that person A transfer $50 to person B and person B gets $50, whereas while deducting the amount from person A, there was an error. So what happens is that person A holds $100 and whereas person B gets $50. This is a real scenario happens in banking. Do you even know that how many transactions happens or how many millions of money is circulated in entire world in a particular day? There are around trillions of dollars of transaction happening in day-to-day basis. So that's the level of how big banks or how big finance system works. Is applicable to other places as well, but this transactional, what it does is, now if successful transfer happened to person B account, if $50 went to person B account, but there was an issue in person A while subtracting that money, then it will roll back. Means that $50 which person B received, that automatically will roll back. That's the benefit of this transactional. So I have talked a lot. This is more like a theory thing, but this is important for you to understand that why this transactional has been used. And it's just a simple annotation, but you need to understand the background of why we are using it in here. And even in the JPA repository, this is done intentionally managed by them. But when you're working with this critical application, right, like payment and all those things, you have to do this thing by your own. Nothing has been, or if you're if you look into a very big code base, right, and then you don't know what that code base does, so you need to understand what this actually works. Anyhow, so we'll come back to our database. If you see that processing the insertion, you are signed up, your app ID is 1. Now we'll go back to our database, we'll refresh it. Voila, we have our table here, we have our columns in here. We'll run our query and we'll see what happens. Wow, we have our record inserted into our database with a primary key of 1. And we also have one more table created, which is Hibernate sequence, which is created by Spring, whereas when we have annotated it with generated value, generation type is table, whereas they will manage it. This whatever IDs are created here, right, they will manage it. So we'll come to this table and explore this in our upcoming videos, but for now we'll come to this on later stage. So now we'll see that our record is inserted into our database. Now what are we going to do is, and if you also see that we can get the ID. So now let us do one more thing. I think if we will just comment these 2 lines. We will comment this 2 lines and see what will happen. We'll just comment it and we will just see. We will rerun it. You see that nothing has been fetched. My app ID is 0. Get ID is 0. So it is unable to get the ID because it is technically not connected. And if we come back here, here also there is no impact. So it's to showcase that it is getting the ID and it is not working. It is not working means it is not fetching the ID technically. It could have fetched the ID, but it is not fetching the ID. So now what we'll do is that we will uncomment it and we will, I think that's all. I think video is getting longer. So that's all for now. We will just subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed. Thank you.